Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR, and we have got a lot to talk about with some returning players coming back to the Big Ten. I have a new guest with me to talk about the returning players. Not every single one of them, but we are each going to name 5 returning players that we think are going to make an impact next year in the Big Ten. I have Big Jeff Ryder coming here with us today. Jeff, how you doing? Till you tell people where they can find you at.
Hey, JR, thanks for having me on. So Jeff McMichael at Big Jeff's FT Ball, that's on Twitter. And then I have a website, bigjeffsfootball.com, covering many things tied to Big Ten football. And what a year it is to cover it, JR. Very exciting.
Yes, for sure. We've
Semifinals.
taken down the dirty SEC, and we're having fun doing it. So it's a great time to be covering the Big Ten. So what Jeff and I are going to be doing in this episode is we are going to each name 5 players from different schools. So we're not going to spend all of our time on Nebraska or Michigan or something like that. We're going to name 5 different players from 5 different schools each, and we'll talk about kind of their impact. How do we think they're going to make an impact for next year? And then we'll maybe also mention some other players that are returning too that also come to mind for us for those teams. So I will go first, and then I'll let Jeff give his first one after me. My first one, and for whatever reason, I'm just stoked for this guy to come back. He's one of the first returners I had in my mind when I thought about guys returning, and he's kind of an underrated guy, but I've loved him since his freshman year, and that's Darius Taylor, the running back from Minnesota. Darius Taylor had a very good freshman year. He came in, he only played a few games because of an injury that happened, but he didn't really live up to expectations a ton this year. There were a couple games where he only ran for like 20, 30 yards, but he also had 5 games where he ran for 100 or more yards. I'm talking about that Nevada game, USC at Illinois. That was a big game for him to be running like that. And then he finished the year at Wisconsin, 143 yards, and then not at Virginia Tech. It was a bowl game, but the bowl site, Virginia Tech game, he ran for 113 yards in that game, 10 touchdowns this season, only 1 fumble, but very excited for Darius Taylor to come back to Minnesota. He's going to be a huge piece for this PJ Fleck team, which just unfortunately for them lost their defensive coordinator. Zach and I will be talking about that on the Sunday podcast for sure, but it's going to be huge for Minnesota. Coy Parrish coming back as well. Kerry Brown, Anthony Smith, the defensive lineman. Whatever quarterback, looks like it's probably going to be Jake Lindsey, but I have a sneaky suspicion it could be Zach Pyron as well. So we'll see what's going to happen there. And but this defense, they got a safety duo in Parrish and Brown returning. Just a year ago, Minnesota had one of the best safety duos in all of college football. Looks like they could have one of the best safety duos in all of college football again, depending on who they hire as the defensive coordinator. But I'm really excited for Minnesota next year. Jeff, who is your impactful returner coming back?
So one comment on what you said, JR. So with Max Brosmer graduating, right? I think Minnesota might get back to a little bit more run heavy next year with Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely agree with that. So I'm going to hit on Penn State Nittany Lions. I know they had a tough game the other night, losing to Notre Dame, but Drew Allar, as you all probably know, has announced his return to Penn State. Frankly, if he would have had a big game and led him to the national title, I think he would have changed his mind because he probably would have been the first or second quarterback chosen in this draft, I believe, which is a weak draft. I think he's going to be the number 1 quarterback in the Big Ten, despite his struggles in some of these big games. He showed clear strides from year 1 to year 2. His completion rate went from 60% to 67%. His yards per completion went from 6.8 yards per pass to 8.4. I mean, those are huge numbers. And he also rushed for 302 yards. I think that's might be one of the more impressive things. I knew he was a good thrower, but this year, JR, his ability to extend the play, to pick up third downs. I actually thought Will Howard would do more of that, but I thought Drew Allar did a better job, frankly, than Howard did in that regard. And then offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki. So far, I'm assuming he's coming back. That's important for Drew Allar's development, I think. And then the other thing is, if Penn State had better wide receivers, I think they would have beat Notre Dame. If they had one really good downfield threat, and next year, hopefully, they're going to get them. So they have Kyron Hudson, transferring from USC. He had 462 yards receiving. And Devontae Ross, the number one receiver from Troy. And JR, I know this is not a transfer portal discussion, but this ties here. The Ross kid from Troy had over 1,000 yards receiving, 11 touchdowns. So next year, Drew Allar is or should have better downfield receiving threats. And I really look for him, combined with Kotelnicki in his second year, to really take off. And he's going to make Penn State probably one of the top 3 teams in the country next year. Some of my other guys for Penn State, JR, I have Zane Durant. This just was announced today. All Big Ten defensive tackle. He is coming back. He's a junior, has 1 year left, 11 tackles for loss. Zaki Wheatley is a safety for Penn State, junior safety, leader of the defense, of course, is the safety position. He's the 3rd leading tackler with 95 tackles for Penn State, 3 interceptions. And then finally, and they haven't announced this yet, but you have the running back duo of Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. You know, if one of them came back, that would be a big deal. Katron Allen actually had the better year. I always thought Singleton was the better back, but I saw in the second half of this year, maybe it had to do with health, but Katron Allen was a beast. I have a feeling he goes pro. Singleton, maybe he'll come back, but I kind of list them as 2 potentials, JR.
Yeah, they've been a really good duo in not just the Big Ten, but nationally. I've always said that they were underrated ever since their freshman year because people were talking about them really high, and then they didn't quite have as big a numbers the year after that, so people kind of forgot about them. But I've been impressed with Singleton and Allen all of their careers. I feel like even when they don't have the big numbers, they're still making an impact on the game. And I love the pick of Zane Durant. I know he had the hands to the face in that playoff game against Notre Dame, which was killer. It took Abdul Carter's sack off, but he's still been a really good defensive tackle for him, and him coming back again will be huge for them. So my next team that I'll go with is I'm going to go with Iowa. The Logan Jones, the center for Iowa. Logan Jones kind of came into the year with a lot of hype, and I felt like he had a good season. He doesn't quite have as much hype as he did before, but a lot of that was because of Caleb Johnson. It's because of the defense having some star players there. But you look at this offensive line for Iowa, there were a lot of people that thought everybody was leaving on this offensive line. They had a great year. Caleb Johnson obviously was prolific, didn't even play in the bowl game because of how good of a year he had. But I don't think Caleb Johnson has the year he had if it wasn't for the run blocking that this team was able to give him. The offensive line was able to get to the second level a lot of times. That was kind of my biggest concern with Iowa was, I know Caleb Johnson is leaving, but if you lose this entire or the majority of this offensive line, you could be in a bad situation trying to run the ball next year. Now, Tim Lester's bringing his guy, Mark Gronowski, in, just revealed that he has an injury and won't be able to throw the ball until June. So that is a concern. But you have an offensive line coming back with veterans. They're going to have to fill 2 spots, possibly with some young guys, because it doesn't look like they're going to get anybody, at least from this transfer portal cycle, to fill those spots. We'll see how those young guys coming in to fill those positions. But overall, I think Logan Jones is the piece that makes this offensive line work for Iowa. I think it's really important for him that he's coming back. The other offensive linemen that are coming back are Jennings Dunker, the right tackle, and then Bo Stevens, the left guard. He is coming back as well. And then just one more for good measure, because I really like this guy, and he was supposed to come play for my Buckeyes, but that didn't work out so well, and he's doing okay at Iowa. That's Xavier Nwankpa. I think he is going to have a good year next year, and it's important to bring back somebody to be a veteran on this defense because they are losing a lot of players on this defense, but for him to come back, it will be huge for him, huge for Phil Parker to kind of help have a leader in that room with some more young guys playing as well.
So speaking of impact safeties, my next team is the Ohio State Buckeyes. You talk about returning players. I mean, number 1 listed, is it Caleb Downs or is it Jeremiah Smith, right? 2 true unicorn players who are maybe generational. I know Caleb Downs maybe hasn't gotten quite the pub that Jeremiah Smith has, but anyone that has a lot of football knowledge knows Caleb Downs was just a huge addition when Ohio State got him. So 6 foot, 205 pounds. He's only a sophomore. I live in Georgia. I saw him single-handedly lead his school, Mill Creek, to beat Buford, and Buford is loaded with all kinds of college players, including Ohio State's Seth McLaughlin. So when he transferred to Ohio State, my boys and I, who are Ohio State fans, we almost threw a party. So he's a first-team All-American, leader of the defense. He had 76 tackles this year, 2 interceptions. It's interesting. Last year for Alabama, he was the SEC Freshman of the Year, 107 tackles. So, man, his play went down this year. No, Bama's defense wasn't that great. If you have too many tackles as a safety, that can be a warning sign. It means the linebackers aren't cleaning up and the safeties have to. So Ohio State's just used him in the middle of the defense now, and he's like a rover, just causing havoc. And in the game last night, before that big play by Jack Sawyer, that second down pitch to the left from Texas, it was Caleb Downs who came in darting like a silver bullet, and he's the one who really was first there, JR, with that 7-yard loss that set up the play. So I'm going to name Caleb Downs number 1. And not only that, for his leadership. Everybody talks about what an amazing person he is. He's a leader. Ohio State loses a ton. So he's going to be vital to kind of keep that defense, which is going to be really talented, as everyone knows, of course, but to have that veteran leadership is huge. So, others, Jeremiah Smith, obvious, right? I mean, over 1,200 yards, 14 TDs, enough said. I'm going to list Julian Sayin as another one. So he's, to me, the presumptive quarterback next year for Ohio State. Transfer from Alabama, just like Caleb Downs was. So thank you, Nick Saban, for retiring. And I think he's going to be the key to play well to keep Ohio State in the top 3 next year. I think they're going to start 2nd or 3rd in the nation. Texas might be number 1, and Ohio State will be right there. And then the final guy I have, could choose many people. I went with Carson Hinsman, center for Ohio State. He really solidified the offensive line when Seth McLaughlin, who, by the way, went to Buford High School. When he went down, he really solidified that offensive line. I'm assuming he's going to come back next year. That's the difficulty of covering Ohio State. They're still playing, so those players haven't announced. I believe he could turn himself into a 1st or 2nd round draft pick, which McLaughlin is probably likely to do. So I list him as kind of like the 3rd secondary person, if you will, for Ohio State.
Yeah, no, Ohio State, I think, obviously they got a bunch of players leaving, but it's going to be imperative for them with Jeremiah Smith, Caleb Downs coming back. Neither of them are eligible for the draft next year for them. And like you said, Julian Sayin as well, he is a player that is most likely going to be the starting quarterback for them next year, providing they don't go into the portal and get somebody, but the portal is pretty much done at this point. So I would say it's safe to assume they're not going to get anybody. My next one that I'll go to is a quarterback, and this quarterback could rival Drew Allar to be the best quarterback in the Big Ten if they have a really good year, because Illinois brings back a ton of players, and that quarterback for Illinois is Luke Altmyer. He transferred in from Ole Miss. I believe he was the backup for Jackson Dart his freshman year. He's coming back for his 3rd year as the starter at Illinois. It looked like he could have possibly went to the NFL draft. He wouldn't have been a super early pick, but he would have probably gotten drafted. But for him to come back for this next season is huge, and just all the momentum that Illinois has right now with so many other players coming back as well. You're talking J.C. Davis, who had a good year at left tackle this year. Gabe Yakus, the edge kind of outside linebacker that's coming back. Xavier Scott, the star DB that they have coming back as well. Luke Altmyer is going to have a good amount of guys there, which is huge as well because he's losing his wide receivers. He's losing Zakari Franklin and Pat Bryant. Is he going to be able to continue on with the passing game of Illinois without those guys? I think Luke Altmyer can do it, but they are going to have to get him some good weapons on the outside. They've been working on the transfer portal. They got Justin Bowick from Eastern Illinois. We'll see how he is able to progress and come up to the next level. But Luke Altmyer had a very good season. Didn't quite get the accolades just because I do think there's a little bit of the big brand bias there a little bit, but I mean, for the first half of the season, Luke Altmyer looked like one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten, and I was really liking the way he played. Not to say I didn't like the way he ended the year or anything like that. He just didn't put up the stats and stuff like that other guys were. But yeah, really like Luke Altmyer. Really like this Illinois team coming back next year. They won 9 games. Honestly, I'm not going to predict it right now, but wouldn't surprise me if Illinois comes back next year and they win 9 games again with all the talent they have coming back.
Yeah, I got a couple of things on Illinois. I wondered how good they were all year. I knew they were a well-coached team, but I didn't know how good. Their performance against South Carolina shows that they were a legit top 15 team and were really close to being Indiana, right? I mean, the other thing that's interesting is I follow Andy Staples on On3, and he released a way too early top 10. It did not include Illinois. And I guess he wrote about this letter or did it in a podcast mention that Brett Bielema reached out to him upset that he didn't include Illinois in the top 10. If the coach is reaching out, it tells you how confident and how much he believes in his team. So look out for Illinois next year. I'm telling
And
you.
I was saying that when I was talking in one of my videos about it, I said, you're putting South Carolina, you're putting Florida, you're putting Auburn in this top 10. Like you're looking at the transfer portal class and saying they're bringing in a lot of talent. What about Illinois? They're bringing a lot of talent back. They just had a great year. I can understand maybe not top 10. I personally would put them there, but I can understand maybe not. But at least top 15. At least mention them as a team that was kind of on the fringe there.
Yeah, what was funny about that is they only did a top 10. So Andy told Brett, listen, I had you guys at 12. I just didn't release it. So that's not bad, right? All right. So my next is Michigan. So Michigan culture, think about it, based on physicality, running the football, ball control, right? And so they lose the Mullings running back who was really good. So my guy is Jordan Marshall, 5'11", 210-pound freshman. He was a 4-star. Some had him as 5-star, I think. The number 1 running back out of Ohio. Frankly, Ohio State fans were really upset when he went for Michigan. That's the type of kid before Michigan started being Ohio State that would not have even give Michigan the time of day. So it really speaks to how Michigan's turned the corner on recruiting. He didn't play a lot, but in the ReliaQuest Bowl, in the Bama upset, 100 yards at 4.3 yards per carry. So he only had 120 yards on the year, but I really look at him to make a big impact. And then Michigan also got Alabama transfer Justice Haynes, who went to Bruford High School also. Notice the theme. I really looked at JR Haynes and Marshall as a potential, like not as good as yet, but a Travion Henderson and Judkins, where they can keep those two fresh and rotate them. Because I could tell you, I've seen Justice Haynes play. He's that's a huge pickup for Michigan. So I list Jordan Marshall. Others here for me for Michigan, Ernest Hausman. So he's been 2 years with Michigan after transferring from Nebraska. He led Michigan with 82 tackles this year. He's coming back. He had 2 sacks and an INT. He's all Big Ten honorable mention. Derek Moore is the single returning line starter for the Wolverines, the defensive line, 19 tackles, 30 pressures. So he's going to be an important guy. And in the bowl game, he had a couple sacks and a fumble recovery. And then my final guy, JR, let's go with the kickers, man. Dominic Zavada, kicker for Michigan. If OSU had him, if Ohio State had him, they don't lose to Michigan. If the Ohio State kicker had done their job, they would not have never lost that game. Then again, if they won that game, maybe they're not in the national title game. Who knows? Zavada, 25 of 26 in extra points, 17 of 18 in field goals. Clutch, right? That's Michigan for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great pick, and I really like that you put Zavada on there. When you sent to me that you were going to mention Zavada, I was like, okay, that's huge. Like, I think it's evident to everybody out there that watched Michigan football this year that eventually they found their identity, and part of that identity is we are going to trust our kicker to kick field goals and get the score for us. We're going to play the field position game. We're going to play good defense, and we're going to let our kicker go out there and kick 50-yard field goals because guess what? He can do it. He does it really, really well. So if the offense stalls out, we have a kicker who can kick it really far and do a really good job. So I don't know where Michigan keeps finding these kickers at. I think they have like a guy on staff that just goes out and watches kickers for a living. Who knows? But
where does Iowa find their punters from? I mean, it's the same question, man. Right?
They have somebody on staff dedicated to it, I guess. Kicking, punting specialist. Who knows? Share your secrets with the rest of the Big Ten, Michigan and Iowa.
Well, Ohio State won't give them the secrets of how you get 5-star receivers to them either, though. So
yeah, that's true. That's true. I think the secret's known though. His name's Brian Hartline, and there's only one of them. So. All right, I will go with the team that won the Big Ten this past year. Evan Stewart, the wide receiver, coming back to Oregon. I thought this was huge news. He didn't have a huge year, but I felt like his draft stock was enough that he could have left if he wanted to. Probably wouldn't have been as high of a draft pick as he wanted to, but he didn't play in the bowl game, or not bowl game, the playoff game against Ohio State, and I did feel like that affected Oregon's offense and what they were able to do. I don't think Oregon would have won the game with him in there, but I do think that early on in the game that kind of contributed to Oregon not doing as well and kind of being held up on the offensive end. Obviously, Trayshawn Holden eventually was able to be a big piece for them and for Dylan Gabriel. But for the most part, him coming back, that's absolutely huge for him, especially if Dante Moore is going to be the starter there, for him to have a reliable wide receiver number one. He was a little bit up and down this year, like I said, but I think another year in the system. I think sometimes people underestimate how much it really does mean to be in the system another year, to really understand what is going on and what the offensive coordinator is trying to do. All things look like Will Stein is going to be back, so that's very good for Oregon and very good for Evan Stewart as well. But that's not the only one. You think of Oregon, you think of, oh, everybody left. Well, there are a few good guys that are coming back. Bryce Botcher, the linebacker, he is going to forego his final season of baseball at Oregon in order to completely focus on football, which is huge for him, and so not just for him, for the team as well. Noah Whittington, the running back, he is probably going to come back. Everything I see projection wise is that he's going to come back. There hasn't been an official announcement, so I mean, he could come out tomorrow and say he's not coming back, and I could look foolish. It is what it is. But every projection seems to have him out there. They did get the star running back from Tulane, Mekhi Hughes, so he won't be RB1, but I think, like I said, anybody coming back for Oregon is good news, because it's just another person in the room. It's another person on the offense to be leadership, to be somebody who knows the system, to come back and help the younger guys, which a guy that was younger and now is a little bit older, and he's going to have to be a leader for this team next year, who has come back, is Kenyon Sadiq. Terrence Ferguson is obviously leaving. That's a huge hole for this Oregon team, as he was a huge receiving threat for them. But Kenyon Sadiq, he was a very good receiving threat as well. He's going to see his snaps increase. He's going to see his targets increase, and I think Oregon fans will be very happy with seeing that happen.
Yeah, it'll be a big year for Oregon next year, but man, they're recruiting so well. I expect them to be top 10 as well, right? I mean, so good ones there.
Yeah,
so
Andy Staples, I think, had him second on his thing, right behind Texas.
Yeah. So I'm going to go with a school that's struggling some. So let's talk some USC and Lincoln Riley, right? He went 6-6 in the regular season. I know they won their bowl game, which was great, but really I look at a critical year for Lincoln Riley, a big buyout, right? I mean, but as the years go along, that buyout will get a little bit smaller, and 6 years just aren't going to cut it. I don't care how big your buyout is. So what's the most important position on the field as quarterback? So Jayden Maiava, USC quarterback. He transferred from UNLV. You have Miller Moss, who was their starter for the first 8 games of the year. He's already transferred to Louisville. JR, I haven't heard of another quarterback, big quarterback coming in, so let's assume he's the starter. So
the only one coming in is that Sam Heward, who went to Washington and then went to Cal Poly. He was like a 5-star, but he's not had a very good career. So I'm with you. I think Jayden Maiava is a guy next year.
Yeah. So started 4 games, completed 60% of his passes, 7.1 yards per pass. That's actually the same as Miller Moss. So he's actually got the capability to have good production. The issue is 11 TDs and 6 interceptions in 4 starts. So, Riley loves throwing the ball, but if Maiava does not take care of the ball, USC is not going to, significantly improve this year. Notre Dame's defense, we all know, is great. USC lit up that defense with Maiava. They had, I think it was 550 yards of offense about JR total. He went 27 of 49 for 360 yards, 3 TDs, but 2 interceptions again, right? So he's got to take care of the ball. In the bowl game, they won the bowl game, 3 interceptions. So it's great news this guy's coming back. He's got a lot of capabilities, but he's got to learn to make the right decisions better. And Lincoln Riley is going to need to take that riskiness out of some of his throws, I think. So some of the other ones for USC, they like to throw a lot. So I'm going to name Jacoby Lane, 6'4", 195-pound sophomore, really a difference maker. He was their second leading receiver, 43 catches, 525 yards, but 12 touchdowns. What does that tell you? Clutch player in the red zone. And he's 6'4", right? So he's going to have those corner fade routes going his way. USC is losing Zachariah Branch, transferred to Georgia. Kyron Hudson's going to Penn State. That's one of the ones that Drew Allar is going to throw to. So Jacoby Lane's going to be huge. Mekhi Lemon is returning for USC as well. As far as we know, as of now, he was their leading receiver, sophomore, 52 catches, 764 yards. So the good news for USC with Maiava, going to have some good weapons to throw to despite the losses that they've had. And the final one I'm going to add, probably should list more on defense because that's really what's held USC back. But Eric Gentry, he's a linebacker. He's a senior, 6'6", 215. So if you watch USC, you see the big guy who seems like kind of out of place, but he's actually a playmaker. Early in the season, he was the leading tackler for USC, but he got hurt. And then he tried to come back. He got a concussion. So he redshirted, but you're able to play in the bowl game. In the bowl game, he had 3 tackles. So, type of guy, a little bit older, though, can be a leader for them. And USC is going to need that. They're going to need to, get better on defenses. You all know that's the story on Lincoln Riley. Scoring's not the problem, better defense. So that's my USC story, JR.
Yeah, I like the mention of Eric Gentry. He was a guy, linebacker, that I was really high on to begin the year. Those first few games, he was just flying around, making plays, doing a really great job, really good job of rushing the passer in a lot of ways. But you're right, he got hurt, and then when he tried to come back, he got that concussion. And we'll hope that he's better for next year and is able to recover because I do think, like you said, he's a playmaker. He's a really good player. All right, my final one. We wouldn't be able to get out of this without talking about Nebraska. Dylan Raiola, the quarterback, is coming back for next year. Obviously, he wasn't going to the draft. He was a true freshman, but he doesn't go into the transfer portal, anything like that. Dylan Raiola is somebody who's kind of hopped around a little bit. He had 3 different commitments in high school. He went to 4 different high schools to play, and so no matter how sure you were about Dylan Raiola coming back, there was always kind of some concern. Could he go to the transfer portal? Could he leave? But he really seems to be happy with the addition of Dana Holgerson. Matt Rule has really done a really good job bringing him in and working with him. I believe it's his uncle that works on the coaching staff for Nebraska as well. So I think Dylan Raiola is just going to keep improving. There's a lot of people that make jokes about him and stuff like that, and that's fine. He was a true freshman quarterback, and he started the entire season for him. What he got starting that entire season was invaluable. And if he really did have a soft mentality or like a soft, leadership or anything like that, he could have quit when the going got tough, but he didn't, because I think Dylan Raiola has greatness inside of him. I think he can be a really good quarterback for Nebraska. I'm not saying he's going to win the Heisman or anything like that, but I think he's going to be a good quarterback for them. He's going to continue to get better, and he's eventually going to play in the NFL someday. I really do believe that. I think that he's got a lot of those traits and characteristics, and it's not just because he dresses like Patrick Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes is already in the NFL. No, I kid. But he does need to kind of mature and develop in a number of ways, and I think you'll see that as the years go on, right? What do we see from Quinn Ewers? Quinn Ewers came into Texas. He had the mullet. He's kind of a wild figure and did his own thing. What did he do this past year? Got the buzz cut, was much more, mature and kind of a better leader for the team. You heard Sark talk about that quite a bit. So we could see something like that with Dylan Raiola possibly. When you look at this Nebraska team, there's really not a lot of guys coming back. They had a lot of guys going to the transfer portal. Now, they've brought a lot of really good players in from the transfer portal as well, but some of these players that they had from last year are going into the transfer portal. A good amount of them followed Tony White, or at least followed Tony White on the way out. Maybe they didn't go to Florida State with him, but they left around the same time Tony White was leaving. You saw some offensive linemen go into the portal as well. So pressure was really on Matt Rule to bring some guys in from the transfer portal, but he was able to keep Marquis Buford, the DB, Ja'Cory Barney Jr., the wide receiver. That was Dylan Raiola's favorite target this past year. And then Justin Evans, the left guard, is going to be coming back. He's possibly going to be the starting center next year. So you get a guy with a year starting under his belt, going to then become the center possibly. That's going to be huge for them if you can have a center with experience to be able to be a piece on that offensive line. We know they got Elijah Pritchard from Alabama. That's huge, but it all starts with the center for me on that offensive line. You need a guy with experience. You need a guy with confidence. You need a guy that can communicate to the rest of offensive line. Justin Evans, his experience, he should be able to do that.
Yeah, so not to beat a dead horse, JR, but Raiola played his senior year at Buford High School.
That's right, he did.
That's that for again. More importantly, though, think about what Kyle McCord did from his first year starting at Ohio State, which he had a good year at Ohio State, right? And he really, except for the Pittsburgh game this year at Syracuse, I mean, you see the big jump between, and it doesn't matter what year you are, you have to actually play football in live games to get real experience, right? So that was his first year. He took a huge jump in year two. Think of Drew Allar as a sophomore, played last year, just gun shy and everything. Didn't turn over, but didn't create any big plays. Made a big jump this year. So I agree on Raiola. I mean, I thought as a freshman, he had a good year. There's no doubt about it. It's hard. And that's why anyone who says, there's a reason why Sarkisian didn't just throw in the Manning kid earlier. He doesn't have the experience, and you're not going to do that in a semifinal game. It just doesn't make sense. So totally agree with that. So final one for me, JR, Indiana. Other than Ohio State with Downs and Jeremiah Smith, they might have the most impactful people coming. It's pretty amazing when I looked into this. I'm going to go with number one, Mikail Kamara, the defensive end for Indiana. So, redshirt junior, 6'1", 265. So he's kind of undersized in height, at least for a defensive end. Was a 2-year starter at James Madison. So all these people I'm going to name are some of the 13 transfers from James Madison. But he had 7.5 sacks as a sophomore at JMU. And then this year at Indiana, 10 sacks, 47 tackles. Against Michigan State, he was a wrecking ball, 2.5 sacks. So, getting pressure on the quarterback, of course, is vital to beat the best teams in the Big Ten. So that's a big return because they lose starters CJ West, who was a beast in the middle, and James Carpenter. Big get back there for Indiana. Sticking to the defense, D'Angelo Pons, defensive back for Indiana. Also transfer, first team All Big Ten, second team All American. Interesting stat, graded number 3 coverage corner in Big Ten by Pro Football Focus this year. I mean, the kid is really good. A little bit undersized, right? You saw that against Ohio State a little, unfortunately, but 55 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss. The next one, Elijah Surratt, the wide receiver. Again, JMU transfer, 6'2", 209. He's got the big body. 53 catches, 957 yards, 18.1 yards per catch, 8 TDs. Big-time player. That was a big-time return. To add to the Mendoza kid that's going to the transfer from Cal. He's going to need targets to throw to. Elijah Surratt's one. And then finally, Aiden Fisher. So linebacker, weak side linebacker, IU's leading tackler, 118 tackles, including 69 assisted tackles, most in the Big Ten. So one of the leaders on the defense. All these guys, in fact, are leaders. And importantly, for any transfers they bring in, Cignetti can use these guys to show this is the Cignetti Indiana way. This is how we do it. We expect to win big games. Let's go out there and make the playoffs again. So pretty exciting for Indiana to have all those guys back, JR.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting for Indiana next year. I saw somebody came out with a way too early top 25. I forget who it was, unfortunately, but they actually had Indiana at 19th. And I felt like, hey, that's huge for this Indiana program, right? That now you're getting mentioned in like preseason top 25s and stuff like that. Deservedly so. They had a good season last year. Their only 2 losses are the 2 teams that are in the national championship, albeit they weren't exactly close games. Indiana did try to make it look close against Notre Dame later on, but at the end of the day, this is a team that had a lot of fight in them this year, and I think Kirk Cignetti is a good coach, so we'll see what he can do next year. But Jeff, I appreciate you coming on. That's a lot of really good information. Everybody, let us know in the comment section. Did you have a favorite returning player? Do you have somebody that's coming back that you're really excited about? Would love to hear you guys' thoughts, you guys' reactions as well. Please do like and subscribe. If you're listening on podcast, please do subscribe there. Give us a 5-star rating. That always helps out as well. And we might do another video at some point with returners. We only covered 10 teams here. There's 18 teams in the Big Ten, so this probably won't be our only content when we talk about returners, but this is some good content for you guys, at least for now. So thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. If you're on the podcast platform, we appreciate it. Have a good one.